Josh and affiliate for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. And as always, football and forwards being brought to you by Ocean Casino Resort and the Gallery Bar Booking Games. The place to be this football season is at the Gallery inside Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. So go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win. For more information, visit theoceanac.com. Geoff Mosher joins us with the latest on the Eagles' day one of the joint practices. And already we got somebody injured. The good news is it's not an Eagles quarterback. It's the Browns quarterback. Shedeur Sanders has an oblique injury. But the good news is Geoff Mosher, he had a nice long conversation on the sidelines with Jalen Hurts. So he at least got something out of today's practice. How you doing, Geoff?
I'm good. And it's interesting you bring that up. I just actually finished writing a story that'll be up on Philly Voice. Not so much about the conversation, but more about Jalen Hurts talking about it after. He didn't talk about what he said, but just being a willing advice giver and someone who I think, I don't know, as I wrote in the story, how many other players can share the kind of experience of being benched in a national championship game, going somewhere else, becoming a second-round pick, then having to fight your way on to becoming a starter, then being as successful as you have as in capping it off with a Super Bowl and a Super Bowl MVP, all within about, what are we talking about here, a 7-year span since the benching? So it's really it strikes me as if I was a young quarterback who, like Shedeur Sanders, is going to have to fight tooth and nail for every opportunity, which he probably wasn't expecting going into the draft, to be honest. I think Jalen Hurts will be a very interesting resource. So good on Jalen, by the way, who said it's not necessarily like an obligation that he feels. It's just that he's true to himself. If someone's going to come up and ask for his time, he will volunteer that time because he's got a good story to tell.
He's also got probably some great stories about what it's like to have 11 different coordinators in a 10-year period talking in your ear. So, I mean, that could always be a fun, be like, Shedeur could tell him about how rough it is and be like, you haven't had 10 different coordinators in your ear. Like,
yeah, I mean, you would think, I'm sure that didn't come up, but it'd be funny if it did. It would be like, you've got to crawl before you walk, son. Like, You've got to worry about making a 53, outlasting 4 other quarterbacks on the roster right now. And then you can worry about whether or not you're going to have a lot of, offensive coordinators. You have to prove that you deserve a lot of offensive coordinators first.
Absolutely. Well, Geoff, I thought today's joint practice, some of the details that came out today were very interesting because your latest Inside the Numbers you guys did with the Inside the Birds podcast, you guys talk about the cornerback position, and we got to see a little bit of Jacorian Bennett on the field at joint practice today. And I want to give out the whole thing that you and Sam talked about, because I want people to go watch it and consume it, because those charts are absolutely fascinating that you guys got the breakdown there. But I did think it was interesting because I think you kind of got an idea of visually at joint practice a little bit of what you guys talked about with the Inside the Birds podcast, Geoff, which is Jacorian Bennett. He's starting to look more and more like he really is the best option at that number 2 corner spot.
We'll see. What I like about what Sam Finkel did on Inside the Data, Josh, and thanks for bringing that up. It was a really good episode. The charts are interesting because what he did was compare Jacorian Bennett's snaps so far and how they measured up not only against Keely Ringo's snaps from last year and Adoree Jackson's snaps from last year, but even guys like Isaiah Rodgers, and I think Darius Slay was also on that. So you get an idea because it's hard to take Keely Ringo and make any kind of analytical comp because he only played 100 or something snaps last year. So there's not a sample size. So if you give up 1 touchdown or 2 touchdowns, your numbers are going to be very skewed because you played so few snaps. But I think Bennett's snaps last year were comparable to Isaiah Rodgers'. So you got to see, all right, when a guy plays as much as Bennett and a guy who was pretty decent last year like Rodgers was, how does that compare to Bennett? And there were some really good comps. And to your point, it's certainly the analytics, which only tell a half a story. Let's be fair. They certainly suggest that he should be in the mix with Adoree Jackson and Keely Ringo. I don't know if they suggest he should definitively start, but I think what what it tells you is that this should be a 3-horse race, and then let Vic decide based on this year's evidence who is playing at the best at that position.
When you think about this cornerback situation, Jeff, I think it's also, the factor that goes into it is Bennett is still learning Fangio's defense, right? That's part of this conversation as well. And, we know that Fangio has been very, shall we call it, brutally honest about, you're not getting on the field if you don't actually know the defense. So, I'm not going to put the cart before the horse because Bennett may be the best, but is he going to be up to speed for week 1 of the season?
Yeah, something Adam and I talked about on Inside the Birds podcast that dropped this morning is that we sort of get too often tied into who's the starter week 1, who's performing the best in training camp. But if we learned anything from last year, it's that Vic is not afraid to, switch things up in the middle of camp or in the middle of the season when guys have enough time and enough reps. And Cooper DeJean is a perfect example, right? He got a late start at practice. So by the time he got in, they didn't feel he was ready, but they felt he was ready by week 6, or was it week 6, game 5.
Yeah, because week 5 was the bye week.
Coming out of the bye. And you saw the difference that he made as soon as they put him in the slot. And at the same time, at this time last year, right around this time, I think Cooper is just getting back to practice. That meant Quinyon Mitchell had been playing the nickel position all throughout OTAs and all throughout the first 2 weeks of camp. And it almost seemed like the year was going to start with Quinyon in the slot and with Isaiah Rodgers on the outside opposite Darius Slay, because Isaiah Rodgers was really pulling away from Kelee Ringo. But all of a sudden, maybe 2-3 weeks into camp, Quinyon went to the outside. Isaiah Rodgers became a backup. They started getting Cooper DeJean reps at the nickel spot. And that changed for Quinyon Mitchell. He was allowed to learn the outside and figure it out and understand it and really thrive despite not being there the entire time. So in terms of what you're saying now, Josh, Jacorian Bennett may not right now be the best option to start outside corner because he's learning the defense. They have the match, carry, deliver principles that he's got to get familiar with that are not easy. But who's to say by week 2, week 3, week 4 that if Jacorian Bennett makes the team, he's not the starting outside corner.
Jeff Mosher joining us from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. Like, subscribe, download wherever you get your podcast. Just search Inside the Birds. Jeff Mosher joining us for Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill on a Wednesday. Overall, Jeff, is not just that corner spot that's in the conversation on the Fangio defense, it's also safety. And Fangio himself has been very honest about, hey, Sidney Brown, he was injured last year. He did not really know the defense last year. And this is Brown's literally his first opportunity to learn the defense. And today, for example, Brown ran with a lot of the first team. Drew Makuba ran with the second team a lot at the joint practice today. And it started to look more and more, Jeff, like, and I'm not trying to, again, not trying to jump too far ahead, but it's starting to look like that Sidney Brown might be getting closer to being in the driver's seat for that safety spot.
Yeah, I'm far from that. I think just like we're talking about, I think that as long as Andrew Makuba stays healthy and now has 2 or 3 weeks to reestablish himself, this is a guy they drafted in the second round. They want him to start. And not only that, but it sure looks like they want Cooper DeJean to be the base safety, which means that, and then listen, they play nickels 80% of the time, right? So it's still going to be Cooper DeJean in the slot most times. But just by him being the safety in base, just takes some mileage off of a guy like Makuba, who, the big concern was his size, his frame, right? I know he's put some weight on, but it's still not, it's still a smaller frame compared to like Sidney Brown or Reed Blankenship. So it's defense, and he thrives in it and does well, Makuba, over the next few weeks. I think that he's the guy that's in the driver's seat because he's the one that they drafted second round and has the versatility that Vic looks for. Doesn't mean Sidney Brown can't be used, or it doesn't mean he can't win. And, there's always, again, the idea that maybe that he's a nickel instead of a safety, right? Because he has that versatility. And then you're playing Cooper DeJean more at safety. I mean, I'm just not married right now to any one formation, scheme, personnel grouping because of what we witnessed last year where things can change on a dime.
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned
No
that.
pun intended with dime, by the way.
Yeah, well, no, that's another formation. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, obviously, you just mentioned dime. You could run a quarters defense. You could have all the safeties out there. You could have all of them just lined up across the back of the defense.
You could do some things. Yep. You could certainly go play big nickel and get all three safeties on the field. Absolutely.
Yeah. But with that being said, so you're talking about Makuba. I want to backtrack to that for a minute because you're talking about him being – so you're saying that, that video that was out there of Fangio being like over the mountaintops happy. They drafted Makuba. Like that wasn't just a coach having a moment. Like you're saying that a guy like Fangio and the Eagles look at him as like, this is going to be our starter. It might not be week one, but we want this guy to be our starter at safety.
When you draft somebody in the second round, your vision of that person is to eventually be a starter. Now, sometimes it's not right away because you have like when they draft Cam Jurgens and they have Jason Kelsey,
right? It
just ain't happening. When you draft Landon Dickerson, but you've already got Brandon Brooks and Isaac Seumalo, the only reason Dickerson played, right, was because both of those guys wound up getting hurt that year. Safety's a different story. You're not really being blocked by anybody because Sidney Brown is a third-round pick in his third year, and you're a second-round pick as a rookie. So I do think Vic was very happy. It's Howie's call ultimately, how he drafted Sidney Brown. And this is a guy who, again, whose versatility and his experience in college defenses is a fit for what Vic Fangio likes to do. It doesn't mean he's won it. It doesn't mean deep inside he's rooting for Makuba. I just think deep inside Vic knows that this is the better skill set for the defense he wants to run. And so if that guy is coming along at an acceptable pace, that guy is going to be the one to play.
You just mentioned the offensive line, Jeff. Flip over there because that's an interesting conversation. They asked Kevin Patullo this morning at the presser about, hey, no Dickerson, you guys are putting Brett Toth out there. And I thought what was interesting about his answer was they didn't talk about Toth's physical ability, his size, his strength. It was about his intelligence, about how he understands what his role is on the offensive line. I thought that was a very interesting distinction because on a line, Jeff, as you know, full of a bunch of massive human beings, right? A bunch of physically powerful, dominant beings like Mailata and Lane Johnson, and when he starts Dickerson, even Tyler Steen in his own right's a big dude. Brett Toth, there was no like, oh yeah, he fits the mold. It was, no, this guy's got the intelligence and the knowledge to know what to do if we ask him to do it.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, Josh. I know that we all abide by the in Stoutland we trust mantra, and that's fine. I mean, and this could be this would be an even bigger Stoutland surprise than Mekhi Becton. At least Mekhi Becton was a first-round pick and a massive human being and needed to get his weight and conditioning under control, which he did, and that helped him, stay healthy. But it wasn't a sort of question about whether or not he's an NFL player. Brett Toth is in his 7th year. And I get that he's somewhat of the teacher's pet. He's always back, but he's only played like a handful of NFL games in 7 years. And meanwhile, you got Matt Pryor, right, who's played a whole lot more of NFL games and has played a whole lot of positions, left guard, left tackle, right tackle. You got Darian Kennard, a guy they kept last year on the 53 who can play guard and tackle, and I know they like him. Part of me wonders, is this a little bit of a song and dance right now going on with Brett Toth at left guard, and eventually you'll see either Kennard or Pryor settle in there, or is Jeff Stoutland really thinking that Brett Toth will not only make this 53, but be the starting left guard on the season opener if Dickerson isn't back, or the first guy off the bench, a left guard, if Dickerson, hobbles off, or anyone hobbles off? I'm struggling with it, Josh. We all should give Jeff Stoutland the benefit of the doubt. This one, though, unlike Becton, I got to kind of squint to see it. I really think that their best grouping based on just experience and I guess the eye test would be to put Tyler Steen at left guard because he had to play there a bunch of times last year coming in, right? And then play either Pryor or Kennard at right guard because that's where those guys are more comfortable in their careers, on the right side, and that's where they've been all throughout camp. But right now it's Brett Toth, the left guard, until we see otherwise. It would not surprise me if that changed pretty soon, maybe even after the second preseason game, if not before Saturday's preseason game. But if not, let's talk about this next week. I mean, if Brett Toth is still the left guard at this time next week, I think it's worthy of a discussion that we'll have about what he brings from an intelligence standpoint and experience standpoint, because right now I'm just a little skeptical.
I think we should all be skeptical. I mean, like you mentioned Matt Pryor. Like, that's a guy who's got a plethora of experience compared to Toth. The whole thing always perplexed me about, like, why do they love Brett Toth so much? Like, you mentioned he's a teacher's pet. It's like, what don't I and everybody know about Brett Toth? Like, I don't get it at all.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Pryor, Josh, has played 92 games and started 39 of them. And the one thing I felt just watching camp practices, Josh, I thought he looked a little in better shape than his first time around with the Eagles, looked a little stronger. And, he had a really good seal block on that 38-yard Will Shipley run. I know Tyler Steen gets a lot of credit because the linebacker's flowing downhill and Steen pivots to block him out. But the edge defender is Miles Murphy, a first-round pick, and Pryor had him so walled off that it helped create that really big canyon so that when the linebacker is blocked and the edge is blocked, Shipley had, the Amazon River to go run through there or the Audubon Highway. It was just an enormous amount of space. And that was part of, to me, a continuation of Matt Pryor really looking like an improved lineman this time around. So that's where the whole make it make sense thing comes to me, because this is a guy who's getting better, who started a ton of games, and you're playing Brett Toth at left guard. So, we'll see. Like I said, I think this is worthy of a little bit of skepticism. And then we'll see a week from now. If things are not different or changed, then we'll have a discussion about Brett Toth more.
All right, a couple more before I let Jeff Mosher go here on Football on Forward, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Jeff, the Eagles made the announcement just before you popped on with us that going into the Eagles Hall of Fame will be a guy that you're familiar with, Malcolm Jenkins. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on Malcolm getting the nod for the Eagles Hall of Fame, a guy that you've covered for many years in your professional career.
Yeah, and I think what you're alluding to, and maybe some people don't even realize, is that I started off my sports writing career at a small paper in Central Jersey called the Courier News, one of the Gannett papers in New Jersey. And one of our high schools that we covered was Piscataway High School. And the years I covered Piscataway High School, they had 3 NFL first-round picks on their team, and they won 4 straight sectional champion. We call them state champions. They're really sectional titles. But Malcolm was one of those 3. The others were Kyle Wilson, the cornerback from Boise State, who went to the Jets, and Anthony Davis, the offensive tackle who played for the 49ers. So clearly Malcolm was an amazing player. He was an amazing human being, really smart, head on his shoulders, talked to him a decent amount of times all the way back in high school. Had a good career with the Saints, then came to the Eagles. And the one thing I want to impart on people that they may have forgotten is that when Malcolm Jenkins got to the Eagles in, 2016, I want to say? 2014. They already had an established player who was a veteran leader on defense. His name was D'Amico Ryans, Mufasa. And D'Amico got hurt again that year, right? And that's I think his Achilles tear that he had with the Eagles, which he had previously in his career, I think with the Texans.
Texans, yeah.
But either way, that forced Malcolm into a very unfamiliar, well, I would say atypical role, which is becoming a leader on a team that you're really new to. Of course, he was a good player, but it's not like he was an 11-time Pro Bowl player at that point. But he naturally took over leadership in that locker room, despite the fact that he was a relatively new player. I mean, I think he endeared to a lot of folks in that time where, the Eagles signed DeMarco Murray from the Cowboys, and Murray was really not practicing very much at training camp. And Malcolm went and grabbed a folding chair one day. And this is the 2015, right? So this is Malcolm's second year with the Eagles. And he puts the folding chair right out on the field. It's a little bit of a joke, like, take a seat, but also a little bit of a message, like, you're a former Cowboy. You're an Eagle now. Like, don't act like a spoiled, entitled former Cowboy. We do it differently around here. And I think that definitely caught some more teammates' attention. And it was just sort of the acclamation of him becoming a culture changer for the Eagles, a franchise transformer for the Eagles, and obviously a Super Bowl champion for the Eagles, who was a big part of their ability to lose Carson Wentz, go to Nick Foles, and still maintain a high standard and win it all.
Absolutely. And, probably don't remember, Malcolm was also the guy who was the rallying cry, let's not forget, in 2017, when Carson Wentz went down, and he was the guy who, started the, we're all we got, we're all we need mantra. Yep. And that was a big part of their run, because you could argue if it wasn't for the leadership on the 2017 team, that team could have easily fallen apart, Jeff.
Yeah, they could have. And again, so he's had to step into leadership roles of different varieties. At that point, he was already an established one, but he had to be the louder voice, the voice of reason. I've spoken to a lot of people from that team, and, despite what they said publicly, inside that they were crumbling when Carson went down, and a lot of them thought that the dream was dead. And maybe Malcolm did inside. Only he could answer that, but he certainly didn't act like it. He didn't speak like it, and he helped lead that team. I will always remember Malcolm. I think it was in the post-Super Bowl press conference, or maybe the day after or whatever, saying he knew the Eagles were going to win the Super Bowl when the Patriots came running out of the tunnel to Crazy Train, and the Eagles came out to Dreams and Nightmares. Right. So he just could feel it.
Love it. Jeff, before I let you go, more of a little bit of a fun one. So I got to ask you this. So there was a picture caught of two people at the joint practice today. And okay. I got to know from you, what do you think is being said between Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM, and the owner of the Browns, Jimmy Haslam, in this course at practice? I mean, talk about people from completely different worlds having a conversation here.
All right, I'm going to caption this. All right, this will win the caption of the day. It is from Howie, quote, Jimmy, having 5 quarterbacks does not make you a quarterback factory, ...
Oh my gosh, it's so true. See, my joke earlier was because we had Andy McNamara who covers the Browns in the last hour, and my joke was that Myles Garrett asked for 2 Super Bowl winning quarterbacks, and you gave him Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett. Like,
yeah, good one. That's not bad either. That's not. Hey,
yours is better.
Maybe the comment is Jimmy saying, "Hey, we have more Super Bowl winning quarterbacks than you do."
Ooh,
right? They've got 2.
Right, they do. By the way, both Super Bowl winning quarterbacks from South Jersey, by the way.
That is correct. Wait, how many South Jersey quarterbacks were in this practice? Because you got to throw Kyle McCord in there as well.
Yeah, he was in the practice too. Gosh. That's 3.
Yeah, unbelievable.
3.
South Jersey represent.
What's that?
South Jersey represent.
Yeah, South Jersey represented at joint practice today for better, for worse.
Throw Todd Campbell in there, it makes it a lot better too. So that's good.
That's definitely an upgrade as well. He's Jeff Mosher at Jeff P. Mosher on the Twitter X platform, Inside the Birds podcast, and of course Philly Voice, where you catch all of his coverage of the Eagles as well over there. Jeff, great stuff today. Appreciate you jumping on. We'll talk soon.
All right, brother. Thanks. Be good.